الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing our lessons on Islam, Atheism, and critical response. Last week we were discussing evolution and how atheists use evolution to disprove or attempt to disprove the existence of Allah. And we explained last week in greater detail how it's a flawed argument, both from the angle of philosophy or Aqidah, theology. It has problems scientifically, and it doesn't actually reach the conclusion which they intended to begin with, which is that it is possible to believe, even though as Muslims we have reservations with it, but if you were to believe in evolution, it doesn't mean you have to disbelieve in Allah. So the whole argument is actually not an argument. But we said at the end of the class that the reason why evolution is used heavily by atheists is because of how it confirms, for most of them, especially the West, gives them power and gives them ability to believe in their supremacy, right? Especially Darwin's book, The Descent of Man. So this is a good point to be mindful of, that they're using this theory outside of its capacity because it gives them epistemic superiority over everyone else. And this is why we say at the end of the day also shows you that what we're going to talk about today, of cosmology, you won't find the same arguments or as strong, because evolution is supposed to be a wraparound theory, supposed to go from science to worldview to possibly explaining. Again, they attempt to use it to explain every facet of life. Might be in our sociology, our anthropology, they use it for psychology, and this obviously is an abuse. But when it comes to discussion today of Big Bang, quantum mechanics, and things like this, these are not as threatening because the cosmologists, while many of them don't believe in Allah's existence, they're not trying to make overarching theories. Right? So today we'll take a look at the Big Bang theory as well as other models like this. What do they have to do with God's existence? So a lot of the physicists, when they try to present a case for God not existing, for example, Stephen Hawking in his book, The Grand Design, they try to use the fact that we have knowledge, again, speculative, not definitive, but knowledge about the beginning of the world and the universe. And through that, we can say that the universe doesn't need a creator. This is how they argue. And if we go back to something I cited before, and we're going to cite it again, Stephen Hawking's own words about why he believes it's sufficient, right, to have this. Because we said this in the cosmological argument for the existence of Allah. We said that he argues that the presence of the Big Bang or any model will be sufficient explanation for the existence of the universe. So cosmological arguments, in this case specifically the Big Bang and those related, are used by atheists, not all of them, but some of them, as an explanation for the existence of the creation. So the way they're going to use it, they're going to say, since that we can explain to some degree how the universe began, we don't need to then posit further an explanation like a creator. And the reason we're going back to what we said before, because they say you can explain things from mechanistic or mechanical perspective, explanation of how, we don't need to answer questions about who. And we already said this is flawed, right? We're not discussing about how, we're asking about who. But because there's a how, that's enough for them. Because science is all approximate explanation. Remember, science is about how, never about who. Can't give you the full explanation. So therefore, Stephen Hawking, when he writes in The Grand Design, on page 144, because gravity shapes space and time, it allows space-time to be locally stable but globally unstable. Then he continues until he says, because there is a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing in the manner described in chapter 6. Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing. While the universe exists, why we exist. It is not necessary to invoke God to light the blue touch paper and set the universe going. So he makes it very clear. The fact that we can have this model, whatever model you want to use, like a Hawking's model, whatever cosmological model you want to use, there's so many of them. We can prove through these models that we have explanation of our existence, even though it's questionable how far this can go. But just go with his logic. Because of that, we don't need God. Gravity brought us here. And we already highlighted that this is problematic, right? Many levels, not to mention circular reasoning. But pay attention to the reasoning. Because the universe can create itself rather from nothing, from something to nothing, we do not need to evoke God to light the blue touch paper. So what are the cosmological arguments then? So you can use the Big Bang, for example, theory. And there are many theories, not only one Big Bang, right? There's many models of the Big Bang, right? So you can use any version of the Big Bang model, whether you want a Big Bang, a Big Crunch, cyclical models, whatever models you want. They're going to show us that we have a beginning, the universe has a beginning, and due to that beginning, we are here, right? Us as a creation, because the universe began. But the Big Bang is the most common one, hence why most people are familiar with it, because they learned in school. And the theory suggests a simple base model of it, that the universe started about 13.8 billion, although now they're pushing it back to around 20 billion, right? Showing again the problematic nature of their beliefs, right? It was 13.8 billion. We have problems. Now they're saying no, it's actually 20, right? So the older it gets, the more difficult. But just go with the 13.8 billion years ago, from an extremely hot, dense point, right? So singularity. We have an extremely hot, dense point that violently expanded, creating all matter, energy, space, and time. And as the universe expanded and cooled, these particles formed atoms, which eventually clumped together due to gravity, and that's the point, the gravity, to create stars, galaxies, and planets. And the universe is still expanding today with light from distant galaxies showing a redshift that confirms ongoing expansion. Okay, so that's a summary of it. And if you Google, you can see the models. Okay, the problem obviously, before the Big Bang, most of the physicists, they used to believe that the universe is stable or eternal, by steady state theory. And then the Big Bang obviously helped us move towards the idea that we have a beginning. For us as Muslims, this only confirms, right, confirmation that we already have in the Quran and the Sunnah, that we all of us, including the universe, has a beginning. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us. So that's the part where we can say where is an agreement. So Dr. Abdul he mentions that the first point we need to know about the Western scientists and the Big Bang theory is that they and us, we all agree that the universe had a beginning. So we're on the same page there. Before that, the universe was assumed to be eternal. And if you remember, some of the philosophers of Islam, they held that view, which is kufr, right, disbelief. Because if you say the universe is eternal, that's taking one of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of not having a beginning or an end, and giving it to the creation. That's kufr. So of course, science has moved down to the idea there's a beginning. And we said that we use a cosmological argument to show that the beginning of the universe means everything that came into existence needs someone who brought into existence, hence Allah exists. And we already explained that some weeks ago. But now, Western scientists, and as well as those who are pro, right, either Big Bang or not, all of them, they agree there's a beginning, but where they differed is about how that beginning started. That's one, how. And number two, the bigger question, who, right? Or their question, what caused the Big Bang? Jews and Christians who also believe in the beginning of the universe, they have a problem. Shaykh Abdul mentions that their books, especially the Old Testament, does mention the beginning of the universe, but it gives them a problem because the age, right? The age of the universe. Right? So we have to know that Muslims are much more well equipped, of course, because our deen is the truth, that we don't have the problems the Jews and Christians have. So when they try to respond to them about how the beginning of the universe was or who started it, the first problem that they face, the atheists pull against them, is the fact that you believe, according to your Bible, a 5,000 to 6,000 year old earth. Right? Because if the universe is 13.8 billion years, then the earth would be something like 4 point something billion years old, according to them. So therefore there's a problem. Right? There's a huge problem. They're going to say 4 to 5 or 5 to 6,000 years, most up to maximum 6. So let's just put that aside. Right? This is their problem, not ours. But when it comes to the Muslims, what is the argument then? How is it the Big Bang or the cosmological argument is problematic? They're not problematic unless you try to use them to exclude Allah. So the benefit we take is that the evolution argument we talked about last week is a stronger doubt than this one. Because this one is purely scientific and we have nothing to do with that. Cosmologists, quantum mechanics, or physicists, they can all spend the day and night talking about models. It has nothing to do with us as an Aqidah perspective, unless you say that this was started without a creator or by itself or out of nothing. So as we can see where the model is going, they're not going to just say this, they're using this to get to where they want to go. So an example will be Hawking's, after he spent all of his adult life, and he's probably the biggest physicist of our time. His conclusion, of course, is that gravity made the universe. We don't need to mention or invoke Allah. And again, as you can see by the argument itself, it's very weak and it's nonsense. For Muslims then, so how do we interact with this argument? We must first know what it's proposing to do. Atheists will use the Big Bang model or any cosmological model that they prefer in order to exclude Allah from the explanation. How will they do that? They will say, because we can explain how we came into existence or the universe, and that's going to give us a mechanical or mechanistic or naturalistic explanation, we don't need to bring an explanation which is immaterial. Remember, science is all about material explanation, so that's enough. So for example, gravity made us. We came from the singularity downwards, atoms, etc. Natural laws, some of them evoke that, whatever. We don't need to say Allah. And the problem with this is that the evolutionists or the Darwinists we talked about last week, they had a better doubt, even though it's still a doubt, it's not good enough, because they make natural selection into an agent. So they're more clever because they know that they can't say the same. So what do? They transform natural selection into a being. They found the fallacy of reification. They take an abstract concept and make it an abstract being. So natural selection is like an invisible hand doing things. As for these people, right, those who are into this argument, they're not going to do that. They're just going to say natural laws is enough. So Dr. Abdullah says that essentially their arguments, right, are coming after the science. They're not coming with science. Science is just an explanation used to give an explanation. So from some ways, we don't have to really worry about too much about this. That's why you don't find too many people saying, I don't believe in Allah exists because of the Big Bang Theory. Right? Because it's very far-fetched that there's a connection, too much connection between the two. So that's one way. Second way they try to use the Big Bang is trying to undermine the Quran and Sunnah. Like how they did for the Jews and Christians. They're going to say, well, if the universe is 13.8 billion years old, what does the Quran and Sunnah say about the creation? So then they're going to pitch science against revelation. Okay, so they're going to say, look, you guys say Allah created the heavens in 6 days. We're saying it's 13.8 billion years. So you have a problem. Your Quran is wrong. So they're going to try to bring a scientific contradiction argument. Right? That's the second way they're going to use it. So both of these lines of arguments are not strong, as we'll see. But let's address the first one, which is, does the Big Bang even put any doubts about Allah's existence? The answer is no. It only does if you try to assume that the Big Bang itself, it made itself, or it doesn't need a cause. And a good example of that, if you want to see, as we'll see maybe later, Lawrence Krauss, right? Stephen Richard Hawking's student, and the physicist, who argued that because we have quantum mechanics, the universe came out of nothing. And he wrote his famous book, My Universe from Nothing. And then later he said it's from something, right? Astaghfirullah, when he got caught, because nothing doesn't mean nothing. So we're going to see here that the answer to this, that whatever model they hold, Big Bang or otherwise, the question is going to be, are these agents or these, right, this explanation you're giving, is it giving me an explanation of how, or is it giving me an explanation of who? So for them, they don't go into the who, as we saw. As soon as you can explain the how, you don't need the who. So we can already see that's a fallacy already. We didn't explain how we got here. So what's the problem? John Lennox, he mentioned this before, and we're going to mention him. He's a mathematician from Oxford University. Again, he argued with Richard Dawkins many times, right, or more than once at least. And he's very vocal about their arguments. And he says, essentially, his argument, that whenever they talk about causation, causation is of types. One causation is the how. What is something made of? Or how is something made? And a second type of causation is who made it. So when we talk about causation, we have to be careful that we don't fall into the trap that they're falling into. So if you go, for example, to any class in science, when they talk about explanations, they're always going to give you material causation. And material causation just means we're going to explain how something's made. We will not explain who made it, because that's not necessary and it's not scientific to do that. And this is something old, right? As old as Aristotle, who mentioned that there are many forms, there's many types of causes. And to give you an example, material cause will tell us what something's made of. Okay, that's the materials. What is it made of? The materials of it. And then we have the cause of who, the ultimate purpose, the ultimate cause. Who made it? So there's the cause of who, what is it made of? So what is it made of? And then you have the formal cause, which is the planning, the theory, how was it made? And then you have on top of that the ultimate cause, the final cause, who made it? So what are they doing? They're confusing material cause with the final cause. If I can tell you how a car is made, I don't have to tell you the engineer. Right? So the example John Lenz gives, if we can explain the engine of a plane, then by giving a material explanation of a jet engine, we don't have to look at the fact that Sir Frank Whittle, he came up with the idea of the engine. So what they're saying is if you can explain how it's made, its materials, its mechanism, how it works from physics, khalas, I don't need to talk about the designer. And the problem with that is, science can't give you an explanation of the final cause, it only can work with the material causes. So what are they going to do? Let's find scientific models to show how the universe existed, and by those elaborate science, right, mathematical equations, khalas, we solved the question. Right? As if what they're trying to tell us is, a bunch of laws and theories and math isn't the universe, was made by them. So all of us would agree that the question of how doesn't answer the who and the why. So if you ask why is the engine made, we don't know. We just know how. Who made it? You can't answer that, only why. So go to the universe now. Go to Stephen Hawking's argument, gravity made the universe. How does that work? Well, gravity is the mechanism. We said, if you go back to what we just said, gravity, after the particles cooled, and the universe expanded and cooled, the particles became atoms, and they were clumped together by gravity. Khalas, gravity made the universe. It's like, no, gravity came after. You see the problems? You're talking about natural laws after. So we already explained, if you told me gravity, what it did, that didn't tell me who sparked the Big Bang. And so the problem is, they know that. But who are they talking to? They're not talking to people who are studying Aqeedah and theology. They're talking to people who are lay people. Lay people don't even know what the Big Bang Theory really is. They have a wrong concept. They think it's hard fact. Big Bang is speculative. There's multiple models of it. And a lot of it has been challenged, or at least a lot of it has been discussed and debated right now. So that's what we're going to get to later. Is it actually hard science or not? But just go with it for a second. Even if it's hard science, what is the point of this? You're talking about gravity that came after the universe began expanding. How can the gravity make something when itself is required to exist before? So therefore it's a contradiction. Right? So it can't exist, not exist at the same time. But look how they're going to explain. Gravity made the universe. Khalas. That's his book, 2018. Right there. He died 2018. His book, The Grand Design, is a bestseller. That's his argument. Another group of them will say that the universe made itself. Don't call it gravity, just say itself. How? We don't know. If you're going to explain them, okay, how about the universe was a brute fact? That's another explanation. The universe just existed, khalas. What's wrong with that? It has a beginning. You see, you got to pick your poison. You said it has a beginning. It has a beginning. We're talking about who now? Before, they used to say the universe is eternal. It's a brute fact, just like Allah is eternal. So some of them, they like to go there, but what's the problem with that? The first argument we all mentioned, the universe has a beginning. Sorry, you can't run there. So if it has a beginning, the only question on the table is, who or what began the universe? So all these physicists and scientists who are trying to use the origin of the universe as proof against God, they don't have a really strong argument. In fact, their argument is even worse in many ways, right? Weaker than what was mentioned by the evolutionists, right? Darwinists. So now we have to turn our attention to, so that shows you again, this is not really an argument, right? That's why I'm thinking most of us, even probably anecdotally, you notice a lot of people don't leave Islam or have questions about Islam based on the Big Bang. Unless you're talking about it from a scientific perspective, what does it challenge Islam or not, which we'll get to. Let us move now to that second part. What does Islam say about the Big Bang theory? And what are the implications of this theory? Some du'at, some Muslim scholars try to accept the Big Bang theory whole scale under pretense that it is actually science, a hard science, and this is problematic, as we'll see. Because number one, it doesn't have any mention of Allah. So what they do is they say Allah started the Big Bang. And as most of us know from reading the Quran, that this is not true, because Allah tells in the Quran how He made the universe and there's no such thing as a Big Bang. Now some might say, hey, but what about Surah Anbiya? We're going to get to that in a second. But just this idea of trying to go there is already problematic. We shouldn't do that. What we should say is that the Big Bang, irrelevant what it says, it has nothing to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Islam. Because at the end of the day, we have our narrative. Cosmology would tell us things like this, like how things started, but what's really happening? A cosmogony, right? The beliefs about creation story. So if you told me, Allah, you made the universe to a Big Bang, read the Quran, 6 days. What's going on here? So see how people try to read into it and they try to fix everything around it. So we have to be honest and say, no, the Quran is Sunnah qat'i. It's very clear cut. Allah made the heavens and earth in 6 days. So our narrative is clear. We should not be trying to adopt another narrative. But if we were going to go there, some of the ulama mentioned where and what you are allowed to take from it. But the problem that many of these atheists will do is that when they read the Quran, and remember they don't know much about the Quran, so the first thing they'll do is say, look, the Quran says the universe is 6,000 years old. No, it doesn't. I remember I talked to one atheist, he said that. I said, come on, man, that's not the Quran, that's the Bible. They don't know, right? They always do this, right? They think we're all Abrahamic faiths. No, we're upon the real Aqid Ibrahim. These guys who wrote the Bible, that part is batil, he made it up. So what does the Quran say about the age of the earth? Nothing, doesn't tell us. That's the beauty of Islam. In fact, it's the only religion you're going to show you that has nothing to explicit, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hul alim al-Qaadir. He's all powerful, all knowing, all wise. There's absence. Only one hadith, mawdu', fabricated hadith. It says the earth is 10,000 years. Fabricated. It's all made up. And the ulama say the beauty of this is that the fact that the Quran doesn't tell us about the age of the universe. They can say whatever they want, 4 point something billion or more. It doesn't matter. It doesn't bother us. As we'll see, there's no problem with that. Okay, how about then our narrative of the Quran about Allah creating the heavens and earth in 6 days? This is explicit in the Quran. And it comes also in the hadith Sahih Muslim. Okay, so this is very important, because when we try to take the Big Bang Theory on as actual science and try to make a tafsir for the Quran, explanation for it, we run into problems like this. There's a hadith in Sahih Muslim. The ulama differed whether this hadith is abnormal, right? In terms of, it's a hadith in Muslim, but the scholars disputed it because there's no other hadith similar to it. But this hadith says what? That Allah created, subhanahu wa ta'ala, the soil on Saturday, and then He created the mountains on Sunday, and the trees on Monday, and then He created other things on Tuesday, then the light on Wednesday, and the animals on Thursday, and Adam after Fajr, after Asr on Friday. So this hadith, it talks about every day of the 6 days what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did. Showing, number one, an order, and number two, a tadbir. Right? There's taqdeer, there's the planning, and also administrating. Hafiz ibn Kathir, he says, the scholars, they disputed on this hadith, and some they say that the hadith is weak, it's actually not a marfu' hadith, and some say it is. But despite this hadith tells us what? Steps as how the universe was created. So when those people who try to take the Big Bang on, they run into problem with this hadith. What are they going to do with this hadith? It tells you day by day what's been made. Number two, the Big Bang tells us everything happens suddenly. And that's not how Allah created things. Allah created everything with wisdom and with وَقَدَّرُهُ تَقْدِيرًا, with estimation and with planning. So the ulama, they say that also that goes against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's way of creating the universe. A one Big Bang and everything was made. No, this is, where did he even get that idea from? Right? It's very important. This is not science, but it's as speculative as it gets. There's a reason why it's called abstract physics. It's mathematical models that are just supposed to assume an explanation. It doesn't matter if no one can prove it, no one can see it. So the reason we're saying this is that Islamically, it's problematic, because when Allah created heavens in 6 days, what's the hikmah? Al-Qurtubi mentioned in tafsir, to show us creation that you should do things in order and with planning. Otherwise, Allah could create everything in one time, kun fayakun. But He didn't. And here these people are going to say one Big Bang. Come on, man. Right? That doesn't go with line with everything Allah created. Bitartib. Then suddenly the whole universe? No, look carefully. So that's one of the reservations as well. How about the ayah in Surah Anbiya, chapter 21, verse 30? And they tried to use this, again, and some of the du'at, they use this, and we're going to see that there's a middle ground regarding it. In chapter 21, verse 30, Allah talks about, in the Quran, about how He made the heavens and earth. And this ayah is different than the one in Surah Fussilat, which we also tells in more detail. So if you go to this one, chapter 21, verse 30, Allah says, أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ كَانَتَا رَتْقًا فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا. Have those who disbelieve not considered that the heavens and the earth were a joint entity, and we separated them and made from water every living thing? And Allah says, أَفَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ, will they not believe? So the point of the reference here is that the heavens and the earth were ratqan, they were together, a joint entity, one piece. and then we parted them. فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا. So some of them, they say this is proof for the Big Bang. And the problem with that is that that's not how the Salaf explained it. But more than that, it doesn't encompass the theory of the Big Bang in its totality. What does it do? It gives a part of it. So even this, the ulama, they say, well, truth be told, this is not to do with Big Bang. And if you go to tafsir, like Dr. Abdullah says, look, Ibn Abbas says in tafsir, that they were together, the heavens and earth, then Allah raised the heavens and placed down the earth. So he said this could be a description. Some people say, so how can it be, he said, a description of Big Bang, when the earth only came into existence 9 billion years after explosion? Again, according to their model, because the earth is 4.5 billion years, so it came 9 billion years after. Whereas the Quran is saying, Sunnah saying, Allah created everything was together, then Allah separated them, and then He went and He adorned the heavens and the earth, etc. If you go to the details of that, you go to the Quran, chapter 41, Surah Fussilat, ayahs 9 to 12. In there Allah says, have those disbelieved not considered, that the nearest heaven with lamps. So if you go to Surah Fussilat, chapter 41, and read how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the universe. Right? So وَجَعَلَ فِيهَا رَوَاسِي مِن فَوْقِهَا, that part. And read how, number 9. قُلْ أَإِنَّكُمْ تَكْفُرُونَ بِالَّذِي خَلَقَ الْأَرْضَ فِي يَوْمَيْنِ وَتَجْعَلُونَ لَهُ أَنْدَادًا. Do you didn't indeed disbelieve in He who created the earth in 2 days and attributed to Him partners? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues explaining what He did. And then it says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put on the earth the mountains, وَبَارَكَ فِيهَا, and He blessed them, and He determined everything in the creation in 4 days. ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى إِلَى السَّمَاءِ, then He turned His attention to the heavens. So this is the explanation of the 6 days, how it's done. The question that Abdullah is saying, the people who try to take this ayah 2130 and say this is the Big Bang, they run into this problem. Number one, Big Bang is saying everything happens suddenly. No tartib, no taqdeer, first problem. Second problem, according to Big Bang, everything happened once. But then, when did the earth come? Earth is not as old as the universe. So the problem is, if according to Big Bang, it wasn't the earth and heavens all came. The universe was made 13.8 billion years. Then, 9 billion years later, then came the earth. According to the ayah, Allah said everything was together, we separated suddenly. So there's another problem with that as well. And it keeps going further, right? In terms of, if you go to Hadith Muslim, I just cited, every day Allah created something. So how can we understand chapter 21, verse 30? The best way to approach it is not try to put the Big Bang into it. And it goes back to a principle we studied before, but we have to remind ourselves again. There's something called tafsir al-i'jazi, scientific explanation of the Quran. And I want to just touch on this one more time because we said it before, but we have to mention it again. Al-i'jazu ilmi, scientific miracles of the Quran exist. And there's something called tafsir, an explanation of the Quran, exegesis, which is i'jaz ilmi or ilmi, scientific. And many people, they engage in it without knowledge. Right? And so right now, this is not the best way to convince people about Islam. Right? Because when the theory changes, you change too, right? And so you can see what's happening today. But what are the rules for tafsir al-ilmi or i'jazi? You want to do a scientific explanation of the Quran? There's rules, some dawabit. Number one, you have to be ahlul ilm. Okay, so that's already out for most people, right? You can't just come and say, Bismillah, I'm going to help the ummah. No. That's the first problem. You have to be ahlul ilm. You have to know what's going on. Tafsir is the hardest subject because it combines all subjects of Islam. So that's the first one. Number two, that the explanation, the new interpretation which you're offering, أن يكون قول مفسر به صحيح في ذاته, that qawl itself, which is mufassir, the statement you're trying to take has to be authentic in itself. It must be a valid interpretation. And what does that mean? It must be conforming to the wording used in the Quran, or the sentence structure, or its eloquence. Means, can the verse carry such a meaning to begin with? Remember, the Quran, the importance of it, it's very rich. That's why Arabic is very important. It's rich, has many possible interpretations. So it must be possible that wording, the ayah can take that meaning. In this case, where is the possibility? When they use the word ratqan. They try to use that. كَانَتَا ratqan. They were together. فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا. They're trying to use these wordings. And we're going to come back to it. Next dabit, the principle you have to have, is that the person who's explaining it, he must ensure that he's not going to negate the statement of the people before him, from the Salaf, the pious predecessors, how they explained it. Your opinion should not negate theirs. So therefore, it can't be contradictory, it must be complementary, or a suggestive meaning that's new. Okay, because sometimes you can add new meanings, but you can't negate authentic meanings. And the last one, principle, that the intent of this new scientific explanation should not be made the focal point of the verse. Rather, it should be a potential explanation of it. So remember, the ayat have many meanings. The rule of tafsir, what's unique, one ayat can have multiple interpretations, all are valid. Maybe one is stronger than the other, but the ulama mentioned generally tafsir, the different opinions that you find, they're all complementary. Usually, they don't contradict, they tend to complement. So if you add an additional meaning, which we see today in our time, which was not known before, it should not be made the focal point of the ayah. I.e., you should not say chapter 21 verse 30, it's about Big Bang, that's it. It was never about a Big Bang, but it potentially can be, that's what you're trying to argue. But many people do da'wah say, look, I found the ayah about Big Bang. It wasn't like that before they said Big Bang, you didn't know about that. Suddenly it became the focal point, how? And this is a problem we have today. This kind of methodology, you have to be careful with it. So with all that being said, some ulama said it's possible that you could interpret the Big Bang potentially from the ayah chapter 1 verse 30 if you intend by Big Bang that the universe, heavens and earth were together then separate. If that's what you mean by Big Bang, no problem. But that's not what it's meant by Big Bang, right? You see the problem? You don't make your own interpretation, not even a scientist. That's another problem. Some people do not even mufassir and they're not scientists. You're not in one camp or another. So I had a tafsir said one thing, you're not there, and you're not a scientist in another way. Where in the Big Bang it said the universe was together. The whole thing came, right, with suddenty, right? So it's one singularity. Take this whole theory. So what happens is, in order to be in both camps, we oversimplify Big Bang and we misinterpret the Quran. This is what we're doing today. And say, look, I found a miracle. No, there's clear miracles in the Quran. You don't need to do that. So why am I saying this? If you told me the Quran tells us that the heavens and earth were one singular entity, I am with you. But don't bring the whole 13.8 after that and how they went and gravity did it and there's no Allah in the picture and all the lawazim, all the entailments of the theory. So the reason I'm saying is that we don't even need to go that far. Because remember, what's the whole point of the argument? God doesn't exist. You're not even saying that. So why are you taking this? Why are you going there? What we should do is leave physicists to their physics and say, you guys can say whatever you want because it's just all speculation. That's another point. Is the Big Bang hard science? The answer is no. And the proof of it is a theory, it's self-contested. So this is one of the problems that we find as Muslims we have to be very careful of. Evolution, we said, macroevolution, Darwinism, it's not science. And here we have the Big Bang, which is as speculative as it can get. Number one, multiple interpretations or multiple models, not only one. Number two, it challenges theories, their own theories. So for example, according to the Big Bang, we get this singular point and then again the explosion happens. And then from there comes time, space, matter. One of the biggest controversies, where does time come into this? Stephen Hawking, this is what he couldn't solve it. He died trying to figure that out. But let's go further. It challenges the first law of thermodynamics and the second. Okay, so now again, many of you guys here study science. The Big Bang is controversial. The first law of the thermodynamics, energy cannot be created or destroyed. What are they saying? The whole thing was created. Okay, what's going on here? So the whole thing is created, the law is batil or the model is batil. Guess what? They don't care. They don't care because it doesn't matter. They're not like us where they have to have a coherent model of beliefs. It's okay, you can take both. And some of the scientists who raised this, they kicked them out of academia. So how dare you try to embarrass us about saying this? Some of them who raised this point, I'll mention his name later, and they threw him out since 2012. He's been banned. Royal Science, again, Royal Science Society scientists who say, I think we're violating the rules of science. You keep quiet and get out, right? Because again, it's a betrayal for them. But second theory, now watch this one, entropy. And I want to highlight some brothers and sisters. Entropy is one of the most complicated, not complicated, but controversial of all laws. Second law of thermodynamics, because when something starts like a Big Bang, it suggests that systems like this over time will become less organized, more entropy. What's wrong with the universe? It's steady, right? In terms of its entropy, it's steady throughout 13.8 billion years. Kayf, yani how in the world is that possible? I told you brothers before, and I'm going to say it again. Entropy is a powerful tool because it challenges their theories but also presents Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence implicitly. Because how can the universe have such strong entropy for so long except someone's keeping it that way? Again, I'm the one saying this. Brian Greene, go read his book Until the End of Time. He's the one who said like many nights I couldn't sleep thinking about that. He's a physicist. وَالشَّاهِدُ شَاهِدُ مِنْ أَهْلِهِ. Not us miskin people, I don't know much about science, but here's one of the big guys. He's saying that I couldn't sleep. Why is it so stable, the entropy? Another thing we're going to see, entropy gives a direction of time. It comes to quantum mechanics, right? We're going to see that. The arrow of time. There's a beginning and then off we go. Many of them, in order to oppose cosmology, the idea of the principle of causality, They may challenge the time. I'm going to talk about entropy. I'm going to come back to it in a second. So why am I mentioning all this? Is the Big Bang hard science? It's speculative as it gets. And the proof of this, brothers and sisters, Stephen Hawking is the biggest in the field, right? What's his aqidah? What's his belief or his methodology when it comes to science? Is he a realist or anti-realist? What does that mean? In the philosophy of science, there's two models of approach when it comes to understanding the universe. A realist versus anti-realist approach. Realists are looking to see that their scientific models are going to conform to reality around us. Anti-realist doesn't really care. If the model he presents, in this case, the big Stephen Hawking's Big Bang theory or his model of the universe, if it's a working scientific or a mathematical model, it's sufficient. Doesn't matter if it's real or not. He's anti-realist. I want you to understand that for a second. No one ever seen the Big Bang. No one can see it. We can't even. All of this is speculative as it gets. But here's the point: even if the model is wrong, 100%, doesn't matter. The math works. So mathematically sound. It's okay if it's not haqiqah. I want you to understand that for a second. Somebody whose bar of truth is that low, he's gonna put shak in your belief. He doesn't care if it's real or not. What are you worried about? He's just doing math. He's not worrying about this model is actually conforming to the universe we have. The reason I'm saying this is because not all scientists have the same view. It's like asking the question, dinosaurs exist or not? It's an interesting question. But if I tell you yes or no, it depends on what model you believe about science. How do you do science? Do you have a realist approach or anti-realist? So we must study the philosophy of science, brothers and sisters, because if we don't, we're going to look at what Stephen Hawking is saying, subhanAllah, he found a mistake in the Quran. The guy doesn't even care if it's right or wrong, as long as it's mathematically sufficient. As a working model, it's sufficient to reality, because that's the approach he's coming from. But not to mention that he was disputed on this point, right? The fact that the Big Bang is the only model, and the fact that it can't explain itself, and the fact that it's already contested as well, then we're left with a bigger problem. And that's why the conclusion should be the Big Bang has no weight whatsoever on Allah's existence or not. It has nothing unless you're trying to argue that the Big Bang is created itself, or it's a cause for its own universe to come by itself. Or if you want to move to the next one, which the universe created itself, created out of nothing. And we already said in our discussion about cosmology and the cosmological argument, that the universe has a creator. It can't come from nothing. And that leads me to the next point, which is how do you deal with the scientific argument then? If someone tells you that the Quran is opposing the Big Bang, what's our answer? Simple. The Big Bang, is it qat'i or is it dhanni? Is it speculative or definitive? So we have to go back to those principles. Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned there will never be and can never be a sound, definitive, rational argument that contradicts a definitive, clear-cut verse of the Quran or Hadith. And when we say definitive means sometimes the Quran and Sunnah definitive, but their interpretation sometimes can be dhanni or qat'i depending on what kind of istinbat we're doing. Sometimes we might derive something from it that's ijtihadi. So in this case, the Quran and Sunnah say Allah created heaven and earth in 6 days. That's qat'i, right? Clear cut. 6 means 6, right? It's muhkam, right? And then they're gonna come with mashallah elaborate theory that says no, it wasn't. Which one is qat'i? Which one is definitive? The Quran. Which one is speculative? Big Bang. So you can never put them over. Khalas. It's already over. You give right weight to the Quran. And even themselves wouldn't do that because they themselves know also it's highly speculative. The problem that we're having, brothers and sisters, that we might not even know the science well, but we didn't also know our tafsir sometimes well. So we must always ask the question, if two things which are definitive can never exist, because Allah who made the heavens and earth in 6 days is the same one who revealed the Quran. This is His speech, the universe is His, makhluk is creation. There's no there will never be and can never be a contradiction between Allah's wahi wa ra'i, an opinion of anybody. In this case, an opinion and revelation. Aql wa naql, you say how you want to say it. So Allah lahu al-khalq, does Allah own the creation? Wal amr is wahi. Clear? But here we're going to come and say Big Bang. So what we're going to do is we're going to examine Big Bang is what is it? Definitive, not highly speculative. Khalas, the Quran says 6 days, 6. Allah knows. Allah says in the Quran, Antu a'lamu billah. Who knows more better? You and Allah. But if you told me now, another example, and I talked about this before, where sometimes scientific explanations are not qat'i, means our reading the Quran is dhanni. How does that work? Let's say you have an ayah in the Quran, you extracted something from it, and it's a debatable interpretation. So for example, some of the ulama, they debate is there geocentric or heliocentric model of the Quran. We already took this before. Some ulama say geocentric, some say heliocentric. There's no problem with the standard model. Why? Where is the debate? They go to Surah Yasin. كُلٌّ فِي فَلَكٍ يَسْبَحُونَ. Is that tafsir, qat'i or dhanni? And brothers, it's dhanni. Why? Because Ahlul Ilm debated. You have some ulama here, some ulama there. Our ulama, our own scholars. Why am I saying this? Some of us, we make a maybe mistake. If it's a issue where there's a dhanni and as Shaykh Al-Albani said, the science today is qat'i. There's no debate here. He said, why? It's okay. Why? Because this is a scientific fact versus our tafsir, what's ijtihad. See, that's a problem methodology. Why? And Shaykh Uthaymeen said it also the same. There's no real here discussion here. Some ulama did, but see why I'm saying this? Because you don't want to fight on that one. You want to go here and say they're not the same conversations, right? If you told me heliocentric, geocentric, this discussion, the standard scientific model is very strong, it's a fact. So much so that many ulama accepted that way, but some didn't, so they debated. But when it comes to this one, what's the problem? It's so speculative. How in the world will someone go with that speculation over the Quran? The problems come, brothers and sisters, from the fact that many of us, when we hear a theory that's not in the Quran, we get shak. Be careful. Just because you said something goes against the Quran, doesn't mean it's against the Quran. Which leads to my next point, which is that some of them, they further expanded this by trying to evoke the arguments from quantum mechanics. And this is even worse of an argumentation, because it doesn't have anything to do with the law of existence, but it's a very tricky one. The reason, because quantum mechanics is very difficult, right? One of the most difficult parts of physics, and the nature of it's all speculative, all abstract and speculative. So who used this argumentation? None other than Lawrence Krauss, the student of Richard Dawkins. And he's a physicist, but he's a student of this, our New Age theory, atheism, new atheism. What did he do? He tried to use quantum mechanics to evoke the idea that causality, cause and effect, are no longer hard facts, because it's possible for a particle to be, through quantum mechanics, to be two places at once. Again, and the existence of particles out of nowhere, virtual particles. Again, some of you guys know this science better than me. The problem with this kind of logic, it's all semantics. He knows better, because when he was debated on this, he of course had to explain. When he says particles coming out of nowhere, nowhere means quantum field, a quantum vacuum. So he exposed himself. Nothing means something. Imagine his book is called The Universe from Nothing. Then when they say, what the world are you talking about? He said, okay, nothing means emptiness. A quantum vacuum. That's something. So why did he say nothing, guys? Because the whole point was, I have a scientific proof the universe came out of nothing. And I want to trick people and make money. Who cares, right? He doesn't care. He's disgraced, right? He's the one who, when he was pushed to answer the question of incest is good or not, he said if there's no harm, there's nothing wrong with it. He's on record saying this guy. This guy's, it's not worth anything to argue with this guy. But this is his argument. This is Lawrence Krauss. He bears himself. He couldn't recover from that one. But let's argue for a second what he said. What's the point of his quantum mechanics? What is he telling us? Quantum mechanics is trying to oppose cause and effect. How a particle can be in two places at once, apparently, which is not true, or it comes out of nowhere. Right? So we can have certain virtual particles. The problem with this is these are interpretations which are not telling the full story. So therefore, many of the scientists said the quantum mechanics has nothing to do with about Allah's existence. And when he says nothing, he means something, nothing. And when he says something came out of nowhere, all he's saying is that we don't know the cause of it. How about the idea that the particle can be two places at once? Our ulama have discussed this a long time ago. It's not possible for someone or something to be in two places at once. It goes against the principle of identity. Either you're here in the masjid or you're not in the masjid. Unless, of course, a jinn looks like you, that's different. Because Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah, they did the stories about him being in two places at once because the jinn was looking like him. That's a real story, yeah, that happens, right? So if you're not in the masjid right now, it's not you, right? But you're not going to say, I'm in the masjid and home at the same time. They're arguing, according to Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, you can say that. But that's what? Superposition. It's actually not what it's saying. Again, this is abuse of science because he knows this. Lawrence Krauss is not an idiot. He's very smart. He knows. But let's get to the bottom of it. What's the biggest problem with his arguments? One of the physicists, George Ellis, he argued with him. He said, look, you can't answer these questions. And this is the bottom line. Number one, how did everything come into our universe? You're saying out of nothing. How? Out of nothing? And there's nothing can explain anything. Number two, why and what you caused the universe? So first, how did the universe come out of nothing, or from where did we come from? He's saying nothing, and that's not true. And he can't explain more than that. Number two question, what caused everything to begin? Means the universe 13.8 billion, and the earth 4.5 billion. Why suddenly? Why something rather than nothing? Hawking said gravity. This guy's saying, I don't know, who cares? He doesn't have an answer. Thirdly, the shape of the universe, the way it is, and all of its constants, right? Consonants inside the universe. Why are they fixed like this? Why does it have a different form? Right? Could have been a different way. Who designed that? Who suggested? Who made it the way it is? Again, fine tuning. And etc. He answers more questions about this. All of these questions, no answer. So what's the solution, brothers, here? Quantum mechanics has nothing to say about Allah's existence or not. But the only reason Lawrence Krauss is using it to challenge causality, because, as Shaykh Abdullah says, they know very well. If we can confuse them about cause and effect, then they can't use a cosmological argument. If we can make the idea that causality is a fictional idea, it's not a hard fact, khalas, you can't say what caused, because cause and effect are no longer. So we can go A, B, B, A. We don't have to have a beginning. And the problem with this is that even scientifically, causality is one of the fundamental assumptions of science. And to help us explain how this is actually a fallacy, right? Go back to entropy again. What does entropy tell us again? When something starts, it over time has less entropy, hence suggesting an arrow of time. That will also tell us what? Causality, cause and effect. It will also tell us that time is going one direction. It will also tell us that things over time have to go one direction. You can't be saying like a mathematical equation. You can't go, math, you can do equation both ways. No, it's not working here. Not working here. They're trying to argue that if we can say causality is a theory or assumption that's intuitive but not proven, then anything can go. And the problem with this is that if you ask them, if we accept your theory like this, is it based on first principles like causality? The answer is yes. So the whole science is based on causality in order to negate causality. See this? And now I'm going to mention a principle. It's very useful. Shaykh Sulayman he mentions something very helpful to know this. Because this is the problem with all these long-winded arguments and these things. It's all based on faulty grounds. So what's wrong with it? Shaykh Sulayman he argued, rahimahullah, that it's not possible to use experiential or empirical evidence to respond or refute or to cancel axiomatic or first principles. And what does that mean? If something's the first principle, in this case causality, it's fitri, it's built in, you can't use something which is nadari, ilm nadari, which is knowledge which is empirical or theoretical, to go against something which is first principle axiomatical. You can't. Because in order to make a theoretical argument, you need to use axiomatic knowledge. So you're gonna use causality to go against causality. Okay, I'm going to use math to disprove the existence of math. Not going to work. You have to rely on it to begin with. So he says the point is that they're going to be using these kinds of long-winded theories to go against first principles, but the theory is based on first principles. You can't get off the floor. You can't get out the ground. And that's the summary of the quantum mechanics argument. It's a whole bunch of nothing, right? And the proof of this is that nobody heard about Lawrence Krauss' argument again, right? After he got a lot of arguments and debates, he just went for hiding, right? Pretty much, right? Because what is he going to tell us? The universe is nothing, it means something. So that's why it's very important to know the difference between these kinds of things. These are all just smoke screens. So the reason I'm mentioning all this is that you should not be worried about cosmology, right? As much as what we talked about last week, and both of them are weak. Darwinian evolution has nothing against Allah's existence, and this one's even worse. To summarize, once they've made the arguments like these, what they're trying to really do is trying to give an explanation that's supposed to counter the Islamic explanation. I want to finish with this point. If we argue that really the Big Bang Theory is not hard science, it's highly speculative, itself is based on so much dispute, doesn't explain the core questions of our existence. Why are people going there? Why are atheists so resorted to it? Because it's a material explanation, and they think that it's sufficient to give an explanation like this for Allah's existence. Whereas the Muslim, we're not making that claim. We're making the claim that Allah created us, and everything around us is Allah's creation. So we're believing in a creator, whereas they're believing in a set of natural laws, which is why some of them will say that natural laws is sufficient for creation. Again, confusing one causation with another. But really the reason why they're trying to do this is that if we can convince the public that the Big Bang is sufficient for our existence, then we don't need to talk about Allah. And we're going to say something very important here. Anytime atheist brings an argument, the problem with their argument is not only the lines of reasoning, it's also the explanatory power of their reasoning. Okay, we have to understand this. It's not just what they're telling us. Is this theory that they're holding on to explaining the facts in front of us? So for example, is Big Bang enough? to explain how we have consciousness, that we have accountability, that we even exist, that the universe is fine-tuned, that there's all these other things that we have, like our fitrah. It doesn't. Can a Darwinian evolution explain to us the subjective experience that we have in the consciousness? No, it can't. It doesn't have much on this. So the explanatory power of these arguments are very, very weak. So even if they were true, if you were to argue them, they're scientifically strong, they're not not powerful when it comes to explanation. Hence, it's actually a sign they're false. Because you have to understand something. Occam's razor, they often resort to this, the atheists, and they abuse it. Occam's razor is that the simplest explanation wins, right? That's a simple way of saying it. Parsimonious explanations. If two explanations exist, and one of them is less complicated than the other, all things equal, you go with the simplest one. Okay? But the atheist will always appeal to Occam's razor because they always want to assume we're all on the same playing field. We're not. You have no explanation for your own existence. أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ, don't you see? But with the false inability to explain everything, they will say ours is simpler. No. Today, the bigger question is that your explanation is not all things equal. Your explanation, first of all, is contentious, it's problematic. On top of that, it brings out entailments which are even more problematic. So the atheist, when he tries to bring this, he's trying to say, like, look, I have a competing narrative. No, you don't. Your theory is even far-fetched. It's not scientific often, and also doesn't explain their facts in front of us. Like our own existence. We were asking where we come from, and you were telling them nothing. That didn't explain anything. That didn't get us anywhere. And brother and sister, we have to know why this is important. Because if someone wants to find the haqq, you find the haqq because the haqq comes from who? Al-haqq. Al-haqq min rabbik. Truth comes from the truth. Allah. So the problem with them is that because their truth comes from them, it's by necessity short-sighted, fallacious, contradictory, everything you can name. And there's a qa'idah and a principle that if you want to know if a theory or something's wrong, just look at the outcomes that it presents. Butlan al-malzoom, right, or butlan al-lazim, yes, talzim butlan al-malzoom. Right? The outcome, if it's outrageous and ridiculous, it's indication the argument itself is flawed. So if they're going to say we came out of nothing and you're something, khalas, that's already batil, because you're something, so it doesn't make sense. It's like saying natural selection that has no brain, that has no ability, has nothing, has no will, yet produced you who has will. Al-faqdu shay la yu'ti. Doesn't work. Or like saying, for example, the universe has design, but it's actually not really design. All of it is illusion. But that's not how it works, because we don't only see design, we see perfection. So the assumption is not just design, there's a perfection, then there's beauty. Ask them, why is the universe so beautiful? They'll say, it's all illusion. That's what Stockton says, all illusion. What are you talking about? The sunset's not beautiful. It just looks like it. Look at this, guys. Right now, I asked the question before. The universe is functional, but why is it beautiful? Why not only functional? Inna Allaha jamilun yuhibbu jamal. Ibn Qayyim, Kitab Fawaid, read the last chapter. He said, all beauty in the universe comes back Allah, the most beautiful. It's a signature of the universe. Because Jannah is even more beautiful. Allah, you get to see Him in Jannah too. See, Islam explains. When you're looking at the beauty of the sunset, imagine seeing Allah's face, Yawm al-Qiyamah. This guy's going to tell you, you're not seeing nothing anyways. You don't even have experiences. What are you talking about? Your subject experience is all just a cinema in your head. That's what shows you the lawazim, the entailments of their belief are so disparaging, that if somebody adopts it, forget about the arguments. There is no comparison. And that's why I said before, the other lines of argument that we're going to present, next week we're going to talk about the problem of evil. All the other arguments, they're not really able to do anything, because what they're really trying to do, like I said, if they're using a logical argument, a logical doubt, they're trying to make God impossible. They know they can't, so they move this to the goalpost to let's bring the iman of the believers down by bringing shubuhat. Remember, a shubha is just that. It's just a doubt. And now I want to finish by mentioning something that many Muslims have to know. Because if you actually think anything we said today, if it's confusing or it's not clear, it's okay. Because just remember, nothing that they're standing on is actually going to explain to you or give you confidence, or because they're not into that business. They're not about bringing certainty. Their job, if they're going evidential, let's just bring down your yaqeen. Right? And how some of them, they're more clever than others. But let's go to an ayah in the Quran. Allah tells us something so beautiful about the nature of disbelievers, but also the nature of the arguments. Chapter 25, Surah Furqan, ayah 33. قال الله تعالى لا يأتونك بمثل إلا جئناك بالحق وأحسن تفسيرا. This ayah is very powerful. Allah says that they, means the disbelievers, will never come to you with a method, يعني sifa, a description, or an argument, or a claim. إِلَّا جِئْنَاكَ بِالْحَقِّ, except they will bring to them. So they will not bring to you a method. Method means similar to, but Shaykh Atheism, others say, means sifa, a description, an argument, whatever you want to say. To try to oppose the Quran, or find fault in you or the Quran, إِلَّا جِئْنَاكَ بِالْحَقِّ, except they will reveal to you the truth, وَأَحْسَنَ تَفْسِيرًا, and a better explanation than that which they brought. This ayah, the scholars say, there's not a single doubt there can ever be, and there will ever be, إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ. They try to disprove Islam, except Islam has the answer in it, better than it. Better than theirs. It's already in the Quran and Sunnah. And number two, whatever they're going to bring you will be significantly worse and weak, like falsehood, than the thing they're trying to oppose. Allah, brothers, you have to know bil-yaqeen. If somebody is going to tell you, I found something wrong with the Quran, you don't have to entertain and ask him, what's your solution? Give me your answer. He's going to tell you something so ridiculous that it's not worthy to entertain, because look at his answer. This is his solution. Allah doesn't exist. Tayyib, where we come from? Nothing. Salaamu alaykum. Yani majnoon. This is the answer he's telling you. He's going to tell you, I have something wrong with the Quran, and he can't prove to you that right and wrong is objective. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَ تَقْوَاهَا. Where did you get your right and wrong from? I don't have a standard. Khalas, get out of here then. You can't tell me what's right and wrong. Yet this guy's going to come and try to pull the carpet under you, and he has no carpet. See, brothers and sisters, the reason I'm saying this is because a lot of times, a lot of what I'm talking about today in these classes, you don't even need to know them. You have to know these principles and read. When we look to the arguments, just get to the bottom of what they're trying to say. And like I said, fancy discussion of science, get to the bottom. We either came from nothing, or natural laws, gravity. All of this, the fallacy of reification. Some of them, they say math. Math blew the universe into existence. Again, we all did math. Nothing came out of that. Right? And someone like this is so intelligent, is going to say that. Brothers, don't mix between the two subjects. Aqeedah and science are two different things. And that's why they're not people of this knowledge. So alhamdulillah, when we're going through this, go back to chapter 25, verse 33. Very powerful verse. And Shaykh Uthaymeen's tafsir, read it. Or Sa'di or anyone. Ibn Taymiyyah also uses this, where he said it's clarity. And this is a proof of Islam. Anything that they say. So for example, to finish with our discussion, every single thing they talked about the Big Bang, the origin of the universe, etc., all of it is speculative. How do we know? What is the rule of science? You have to see it, right? You have to be, it's observable, right? Science is supposed to be observable, it's supposed to be material, it's supposed to have, none of it is observable. So what do we have then? We all have speculation, right? So we mentioned the ayah in Surah Kahf, right? Allah none of us witnessed the heavens and earth, nor the creation of yourselves. So that means that everything you're talking about is just shots in the dark. And the reason I'm saying that is because if that can only convince us that it's not even science to begin with, I'm sorry, then I don't need to entertain it, because I thought you were a materialist. I thought you were supposed to come rational arguments. So alhamdulillah for Islam. So next week we'll talk about the problem of evil, and we'll try to summarize it, and then we'll move our way towards summarizing the major outcomes of what we're doing right now. Inshallah, if anyone has any quick questions, I think we have 5 minutes left. Yes? So when it comes to the two models, the heliocentric and geocentric, it's not really that big of an issue. Some of the ulama, like I said, scholars, they interpret the ayah in Surah Yasin to mean that the earth is fixed and the sun is moving. When some of the scholars, they don't agree with that. And the reason, even from a scientific perspective, it's not that big of a deal, because it was before accepted the geocentric. But you can say that since our scholars debated, some of them say it goes back to what's definitive. What's definitive in today's time is that based on what we have of science, that the earth, yes, the sun is in its orbit, and so is the earth. But if you said one another, it's not going to create a dispute in your belief, because the problem would be when people say you're making inkar of the ayah, you're detesting the verse. But some scholars say we're not, because Shaykh Al-Albani, the way he interpreted the verse, he put all of them together. So there's a way to interpret this. So at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal. Even some scientists even argue it's not that of a, because Galileo wasn't that the only issue that he had where he got into trouble. It's more complicated. But you can say, some Muslims say, if I say this or that, if Ahlul Sunnah are debating, you should be in safety. Because the Ahlul Ilm are debating. It's not like some guy in the da'wah corner said something, all the ulama said something. If it's ijma' is not allowed. And that's another thing. Since it's not ijma', we should take a little easier on that. And some great books have been written. But the reason I'm saying that the two views, that let's say someone took our discussion and conflated it with this discussion. They're two different. The one we talked about today, the Big Bang is not hard science, such that we have to go and try to harmonize with the Quran. Versus this one, where some scholars say it's pretty much a consensus among the scientific community The same way the Muslims had no problem saying the earth, and when amongst the earthers say the earth is round. Right? It's ijma' ulama from the 4th century Hijrah, 3rd actually, some scholars say. So yeah, so that's not that big of a deal. But I only mentioned that point to the difference between this topic and that one. Yeah, Wallahu a'lam. So anyone have a last question? Yes, brother.
When it comes to theories, it evolve over time. So if you find a defect or an error in one, you could go to sleep, wake up the next day with a new theory, and just with modified according to what you told them.
Yes.
So is it better not to even argue with them because it's a theory and it's not proven in the first place? So every time you're going to argue and find an error, they're going to wake up the next day and they're going to fix it up a little bit more.
So that's the thing. When you say theory is different than hypothesis. So theory is a working model based on the evidence we have. But you're right, new evidence changes the theory. So that's what sometimes Muslims, what happens, they say theory, they think it's hypothesis. Hypothesis is shot in the dark. That's what you do at the beginning. Theory is what you get at the end of the study. But the theory can keep changing, you're right. So why is it important? I'jaz ilmi, scientific miracles has rules and principles. There's some hard, clear-cut ones. Like for example, كُلُّ فَلَكٍ يَسْبَحُونَ. The fact the Quran says the sun is in orbit, we only found out recently. That's clear. That's a good example. That the 7th century, no one knew that. Or you could say very limited knowledge. Or the fact Nabi didn't know it. But the ulama give us a list of some scientific miracles you could use if you want to use it. But the problem is going there as your bread and butter of da'wah. That means you're not in a very strong area of da'wah, because most people are not going to come to Islam just because of this. Right? A lot of people at least are not. Some people are more looking at what's Islam offering us overall. So I agree with you that we have to be careful and very nuanced. But what's scary today, you go to science class, you learn something. You're just in the beginning years you study. You don't know much about science, and you're hearing evolution is a fact. It's a consensus. No, it's not. But in science class, it is. So remember, when someone goes first year, second year university, and he's hearing now that it's a consensus, and then the Quran is against it, see, then he gets doubt. Why is he getting doubt? Because what he's been told. He didn't do the science himself. So we have to teach the people, look, whenever there's a clear-cut fact, the Quran will never be against it. Sunnah will never be. But you're right, if we're going to argue people, I don't think it's the best way to da'wah. There's better than that. A lot of the arguments you mentioned already. But if you are, use the ones that are proven. Use the ones that are clear. Not because today they're saying 30.8, now 20 billion. You're going backwards. They're getting trouble, more trouble. We're just saying you're gonna end up saying Allah made everything. Just keep going. Right? That's where they're going. But what's scary though is not even just this argument from the Muslims. It's the people having doubts. Why are you having doubts about the Big Bang evolution? Number one, they don't understand the science. Number two, they didn't check the tafsir. Number three, they don't know how to harmonize the Quran and Sunnah and scientific study. They don't know this. So when they hear something, science community said this, I must be wrong. Quran must be wrong. Let's reinterpret the Quran. Instead of saying that, well, what are they saying? How do they reach that? See all the critical thinking? And I want to highlight this point because as Muslims, critical thinking, nobody's against it. But why are you critical in some areas and others? Right? Critical thinking only with religion. Hyper-skeptic when it comes to religion. When it comes to their theory, all assumptions. I don't have to prove. And they'll put the ball in your court. You're the theist. You tell me why. No. If you're going to say something for or against, a delay is upon you. So alhamdulillah, once we learn these, everything just becomes like clear. But you're right, like it's not the best place to start because of these potential problems that you find. Not to mention, the more you gain knowledge, the more you're going to find out. And I finished with the point that Sir Francis Bacon, again, the Western father, right, of scientific discovery, or he's not, right, but in the evolution, in the empirical world or the era we live in, he's considered in the Western world one of the fathers of the scientific method. He said himself, a little bit of science makes a man atheist. And a lot of science makes a person a believer. I forgot to mention Newton. He believed Allah existed, and the proof of it is the universe's cosmology. See, it's very interesting. What we said before, Darwin didn't become atheist due to Darwinism. How the heck did Richard Dawkins? Because he's already believed at the beginning, to begin with. Let's go down to cosmology. Stephen Hawking says God doesn't exist. Here's Newton, who's much more influential. He says God exists, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is the prophet sent to the Arab. I'm telling you, you can't make this stuff up, right? You can't make this up with us. Newton is a very interesting person. He's a Unitarian Christian. He said God exists, and the proof of it is gravity and the beginning of the universe, etc. All his studies of this, the fact he formed calculus. And the second point, that Muhammad ﷺ, he believed, was sent to the Arab. He didn't believe universally his message. That's something, Allah Alam, if he had that much knowledge or not. But Newton sounds like a very smart guy. He is, right? So it's interesting when they come and say, oh, I don't believe. Come on, man. You don't have the same, you're not even in the top 100. We don't need to listen to you, man. Remember, Nabi Sallallahu number one of the top 100. Newton's there too. Hawking's not there.